Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Tanco, and I serve as the strategic advisor of the president of the Migration Policy Institute, a think tank based in Washington, D.C., as well as in Brussels in Europe. I am delighted to be here today to talk to you about the importance of diversifying your funding sources to build a resilient organization. And especially, I'm going to talk about the tips and factors to consider when venturing into private sector fundraising. Nowadays, the funding landscape for think tanks is more complex than ever. Our organizations face two main challenges. On the one hand, the marketplace of ideas and knowledge has become more competitive and more saturated, with new actors entering the knowledge ecosystem, such as for-profit consulting agencies, advocacy and media organizations, to mention a few. On the other hand, the face of philanthropy is also changing. Donors are focusing more and more on projects that are short-term, specific, and high impact. Most think tanks, as a result, have had to innovate their strategy to find sources for what we refer to overhead operations, but that are essential to the well-being of our organizations, such as the departments of administration, human resources, and the communications department. So, in order to become more resilient, some think tanks are either moving towards endowment-based funding to increase the long-term stability, and others have alluded to the establishments of funds such as shared reserves funds and an emergency bridging fund to build capacity and avoid financial risk. What is certain, though, is that most think tanks are diversifying their funding sources and they're tapping into new ventures, including private sector engagement. Fundraising from the private sector comes with its own benefits and challenges, and also with some risk. And there are essential factors to bear in mind to avoid controversies and scrutiny that can threaten the credibility of your organization. After all, as a source of knowledge, ideas, and analysis, think tanks must look after what is their biggest asset, the trust from their partners and their stakeholders. Among the main benefits for engaging with the private sector on fundraising is the specific access to unrestricted funds, clearly depending on the model. But donations from the private sectors can be earmarked for specific purposes, but are very much often general grants. Besides the financial resources, of course, there are other benefits of engaging with the private sector. At times, the private sector might offer opportunities to connect with other contacts in the research project. These can be experts, business leaders, or other non-state actors. And there is also the possibility to consult them in the research process, such as experts or data providers. And they can also be an avenue to maximize your impact and to socialize and disseminate the findings in other audiences. However, and certainly, there are some challenges and risks associated with private sector fundraising, and this is mainly in regard to self-determination and resource dependency. In fact, many renowned think tanks have been subject to scrutiny because of their funding relationship with the private sector. When think tanks are depending on one sole funder for a specific project, there is a higher risk that that funder will attempt to influence the research agenda or tailor the research methodology to satisfy the funding stream. As such, it is definitely better to have multiple streams of fundings and donors, and from multiple types, whether it's philanthropic organizations, other grants coming from governments or other international organizations, as well as from the private sector or individual giving campaign. Dependency on the private sector funding can also threaten to hurt the credibility or reputation of your organization or the research methods, also the intention and conclusions of your research projects. Some think tanks in the past have faced backlash for not disclosing their funding sources or their relationship with their funders, or for developing stories that highlight that funder's approach in tackling the issues at stake. There's been also some other instances when funders request to see preliminary findings of a report before the information is publicly available, and they have used such findings for lobbying purposes. As a result, it is important to develop a set of guidelines and policies that are both external and internal. Externally, so that they can have clear, like a clear guidance on what's going to be your relationship with that funder, and internally, so that your staff knows how to engage with those funders. Last fall, in 2020, the Migration Policy Institute began to broaden its outreach and engagement with the private sector to support our work and broaden our reach and influence of our evidence-based research and analysis. Cognizant of the risk of venturing into private sector fundraising, we developed a set of guidelines for our staff on how to engage on fundraising activities while upholding our strong tradition and independent thought and research integrity, and to also ensure that any stream of funding was aligned with our mission, our goals, and our values. Certainly, the guidelines that each organization developed is going to be tailored to the needs of that organizations. But at MPI, we decided to address the following areas: independence, freedom from interference, integrity, diversity of funding, transparency, engagement, and conflict of interest and lobbying. After we developed the guidelines in conjunction with program directors and staff, so making sure that we were answering their concerns and the risk addressed with venturing into private sector engagement, we felt comfortable beginning fundraising with the private sector. So how did we do it, and what lessons learned are for others who wish to venture into private sector fundraising? First, we identify who will be the fundraisers or who will be the door openers. It is critical to identify who among the leadership of your organization or your partners has the connections or can link you to actors in the private sectors. These can be members of your board of trustees or your advisory board. It can be a former funder, a former colleague, a former expert of analysts. Whoever it might be, make sure to leverage your existing network. The second step is to identify who are your prospects for funding. If you're unsure where to start looking for prospects, look at your competitors. Private sectors actually have a larger basket of resources available for giving. And it is likely that if they are funding your competitors because it is a cause that they care about, they're also going to be likely to support your work. You can also make sure to check the environmental, social, and governance reports of different companies. And this will give you an insight as to whether there is strategic priorities aligned with your areas of work or the topics that your organization covers or focuses on. Third, make sure that you have clarity about what's your value proposition. What are you offering in this partnership and how will you do it? Usually members of the private sector, representatives from the private sector, they care about having access to information or analysis, especially if this is something that is aligned with their corporate responsibility strategy or with their ESG strategy as well. This can also be a topic that is very close to the mission of the company or that is very important to the internal culture of their staff. We have also considered that they may be looking into expanding their relationships and their networks, or they also want to be part of a council, or they want to get to know like-minded peers. Whatever it is, just make sure that you have clarity on what are you offering before you get into a partnership with them. And four, very important, before you try to pitch any idea or any request for funding, make sure to develop the relationship. Before making the ask, make sure that your prospective funder actually learns thoroughly about your organization, but this is beyond your mission and your areas of work. Create opportunities where you can socialize your research project and where they can also see the talent in your organization and the added value to the policy environment. And fifth and last, make sure that you have a clear sense of what's your model. At MPI, we have developed a business council. It's a model that is dependent on a membership fee. And with this membership fee, our business council members get a variety of benefits. While a business council might be one idea, there are other ways that you can engage with the private sector in your work. These can be also membership based, but for an advisory board, such as other think tanks have done it, or through a sponsorship. These are just some of the models that have been developed across think tanks to engage with the private sector. But whatever you decide to do, just make sure to bear in mind these 5 points.